Heads up, even though I'm not placing a disclaimer card in this video, which, yeah, I did put one in Hotline, and I still don't really know why outside of me wanting to have a creative opener for that video, there is imagery in this game that isn't suitable for everyone. War is hell indeed. With that said, let's talk about the single player mode of Call of Duty World at War. My relationship with the COD franchise is about as standard as it can get. I was a lobby monkey around the time the games were hitting their high point.
With your voice. Your mom's voice. It sounds like you just deep-throated a cow.
Yeah, I deep-throated your mom.
That doesn't make sense.
Ah, good times, good times.
Yes, I played through the boom that was Modern Warfare multiplayer, and then like a lot of others, I dropped around the time after Black Ops 2. I had my fill. I didn't clamber for creepy Kevin or space.
I want to address these allegations head on.
However, due to extenuating circumstances, I somehow got dragged into Detective Stapler's mental misadventure and contemporary combat remade. Granted, I know how throwaway that sounds, and it is for Black Ops 3 because I still don't know what was happening in that game, but I had fun with Modern Warfare because not only did I play it with friends, it brought me somewhat back to the root of the series. I'm phrasing it this way because the actual core of COD for me will always be World at War due to it being my first experience with the franchise. It was either my first or second summer in the state that I currently live in when I first feasted my eyes on World at War. We, that being my family and me, had friends visiting from Ohio.
From where you're kneeling must seem like an 18-carat run of bad luck. Truth is, the game was rigged from the start.
One of them brought his Xbox 360. One of the games he bigged up was COD, and me wanting to see what it was all about, got to play it and have my tiny preteen mind blown away. He also showed me BioShock 2, another game that I thoroughly enjoy to this day. Shit, I just gave away this episode, didn't I? I'll begin this section with a singular date, November 5th, 2007, the day that Call of Duty 4 Modern Warfare was released. Developed by Infinity Ward and published by Activision, like Halo before it, Modern Warfare redefined the first-person shooter genre. Call of Duty as a franchise had existed before this important date, but the series was mostly based in the World War II era and only really competed with the likes of Medal of Honor, a similarly styled WW2 FPS series originally developed by DreamWorks Interactive and Steven Spielberg. That makes sense when you realize that Infinity Ward, one of the two original developers of the series, Raven Software, was merged into Activision, thus I can't count them as one of the originators, and I know them more from the X-Men Legends and Ultimate Alliance games, was mostly made up of the people who developed Medal of Honor Allied Assault. Releasing Call of Duty in 2003 on Windows, OS X, and the Nokia N-Gage. Yeah, the Nokia N-Gage makes an appearance in this video. Makes me a bit sad. It was both a financial and critical success, standing out amongst its peers, one of them being the middling reviewed Medal of Honor Rising Sun, with numerous Game of the Year awards and the coveted Shooter of the Year award from the editors of A Computer Gaming World. That'd be like if your right hand detached from your body and went on to not only follow in the same career path you chose, but was better than you in every way. 2 years later, and Call of Duty 2 was released, reaching not the same heights as the original game, but coming extremely close. It's this game that would serve as the groundwork for a few staples in the franchise, i.e. regenerative health like Halo, though isn't it shields in that game? I've never played Halo, so when I think regenerative health and shooters, I think COD, as well as setting the stage for the complete renovation of the shooter landscape. However, Call of Duty 2 wasn't the only Call of Duty 2 released in 2005, as there was a sub-series for the franchise that was started back in 2004 with the Spark Unlimited Exact Entertainment developed Call of Duty Finest Hour, focused on console releases. Call of Duty 2 Big Red One was a Treyarch joint, and though not as successful as Call of Duty 2, it earned somewhat favorable reviews like how Finest Hour did. Enough to the point that Treyarch, which was an Activision subsidiary since their acquisition by the company in 2001, was chosen by Activision to be the developer for the next numbered COD game, Call of Duty 3. I can't say for certain if Finest Hour and Big Red One was Activision testing the waters with having a second developer for the franchise, a ploy to get more money. This is Activision I'm talking about, one of the greediest publishers of all time, that spiraled into getting a second developer, or both. But it says a lot that Noah Heller, the senior producer of Call of Duty World at War, said in an interview with Video Gamer that Treyarch only had 8 months to develop Call of Duty 3. There's also a little bit more credence to what I'm saying when you look at Treyarch's history versus Spark Unlimited. sides. The first game Spark ever developed was Finest Hour, while Treyarch already had a proven track record, having co-developed Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 2X alongside series developer Neversoft, and before that, porting Tony Hawk 1 and 2 to the Dreamcast, Spider-Man the Movie Game 1 and 2, Ultimate Spider-Man, and Minority Report Everybody Runs. Hey, now you know I'm an internet reviewer because I brought that game up. Also, tangent time because I want to bring up what else Spark developed, that being legendary and FPS with neat concepts but poor execution, and Yaiba. Man, if you thought being a Metroid or Bayonetta fan was bad, you ain't got nothing on Ninja Gaiden fans. Oh yeah, Keiji Inafune was a producer for Yaiba as well, because that man must latch himself like a parasite onto everything I like. If you're wondering, Spark is no longer a company, so I feel a little bit sad for the employees not named Inafune. But now I'm getting too far away from Call of Duty 3, so let's go back to it to explain developer rotation. Treyarch wasn't taking the developer position away from Infinity Ward, adding a bit more fuel to my Activision wanted more money fire. Instead, the two companies agreed via contract to rotate development for each new Call of Duty game. Treyarch's Call of Duty 3 sold extremely well, being rated the 5th best-selling game and 2nd best-selling Xbox 360 game in November 2006 by IGN, but its review scores were the lowest out of the 3 mainline Call of Duty games. Going back to the interview with Video Gamer, Noah, not me, said that it's not the game this team could have made if it had the time to polish to the level they needed to. It's perhaps why Infinity Ward was given 2 years and a team near the 100-person mark to develop Call of Duty 4 Modern Warfare. With Treyarch taking the reins of developing the World War II era games, Infinity Ward was free to tackle the modern age. Following the landmark known as Modern Warfare, there's a reason why I refer to the remake as Contemporary Combat, Activision would announce on June 23, 2008, 2 days after a trailer drop on Xbox Live, that the next Treyarch-developed Call of Duty game would be World at War. Development had already started after the release of Call of Duty 3, giving Treyarch around 2 years' time to work on the game, a form of apology for the crunch that was Call of Duty 3. Activision does love treating Treyarch like the red-headed stepchild after all, as the developer would be later crunched for Black Ops 4. The announcement of World at War, at least in the comment section of computerandvideogames.com, was met with disdain. A lot of people tired of the setting and not caring that this was Treyarch's time to shine. They had big shoes to fill, but Treyarch head Mark Lemire was happy to try and fill them, expressing that the game is a scarier Call of Duty than we've ever seen. Wanting to stand out against its groundbreaking brother, the AI for World at War received modifications to best fit the new theater that would be in the game, the Pacific Front. As creative lead Rich Fairley explains, we figured out early that the Imperial Japanese fought in a different way that was full of suspense. Enemies in this theater would focus more on rushing the player with bayonet charges instead of sitting behind cover like in both the previous COD games and the other theater that'd be in World at War, the Eastern Front. The AI wasn't the only part of the design that was tweaked, as World at War used an improved Modern Warfare engine allowing for new effects such as destructible environments and dismemberment. One of the biggest advertisements for the game was that Gary Oldman, fresh off his roles as Commissioner Gordon in The Dark Knight and Ignitus in the Legend of Spyro series, and Kiefer Sutherland, who was in the midst of the Jack Bauer phase of his career, would voice act for World at War. On the musical side of the game, Sean Murray, who had proven his chops to Treyarch with his work on True Crime, Streets of LA, and New York City, was picked to compose the score. He had help from Adam Levinson, Activision's audio director, and Brian Toohey, Treyarch's audio director, but Murray basically had free range to do whatever he wanted. In an interview with Music for Games, Murray discloses that the music is rooted in 20th century and modern symphonic music, but we go everywhere from there. Rock, metal, industrial, trance. I try to musically follow closely the state of mind of the soldiers as they are subjected to more and more violence. This psychological approach gave us a great amount of musical latitude. World at War also includes occlusion, a feature that I don't know if Modern Warfare had, as every time I try searching for it I get bubkiss, to help immerse the player into the world by muffling sounds depending on distance and material. Flux was also another new addition to the game, a system developed by Treyarch using field recordings to best capture the sounds made by World War II weaponry. The game was released on November 11, 2008 on PlayStation 3, Xbox 360, Wii, and Windows for America, November 12th for Australia, and November 14th for Europe. Damn! I was looking forward to making fun of that continent. History does repeat itself for World at War, as it wasn't the only World at War to be released. A day before the game released for the current gen at the time, World at War Final Fronts was pushed out onto the PlayStation 2, it being the last COD released on the console. Being developed by Rebellion in the midst of their lost generation, seriously the only noteworthy games they released during 2007 to 2010 was the Simpsons game and Aliens vs. Predator, the game tanked harder than the Valiant. The version I played was the Steam release, which does have a few foibles tied to its resolution, which can be changed in-game, game, and I got a weird safety error plus crashing when booting up, but a simple file verification sorted that out. If you want multiplayer, World at War works right out of the box on Steam, and there are still people who play it. I won't be covering it, as my interest is more in the single player experience, but it's a blast to play and it doesn't shake you down for shekels every time you hop on. I also won't be covering zombies, as that game mode works better in multiplayer. I'm going to be doing something different with this recap, and I'll explain why in the analysis section of this tab. You'll probably catch on to what I'm doing before I get there, but I want to at least provide a reasoning for my rationale. Our tale begins smack dab in the middle of World War II, just after Imperial Japan has bombed Pearl Harbor. Private Miller and his fellow Marine raiders have gone missing during a reconnaissance mission of the Japanese base of Macon Atoll. The importance of this mission is highly important, thus a detachment of Marines led by Sergeants Tom Sullivan and Roebuck have been sent to the island to hopefully rescue anyone still alive. Unlucky for them, many of the raiders held as prisoners by the Japanese have been executed, though they do manage to rescue Miller before he can share his brother's fate.
Miller, you're okay. Thank God.
The three, alongside some fellow nameless Marines, destroy the base, kicking off America's island hopping strategy they implemented during the war. We then skip to 1944, where our three lads are landing on the beaches of Peleliu, attempting to take control of the airfield located on the island. The trudge up the beach is exactly that, as not only do the Marines face quite a bit of resistance coming from the AA gun shooting down their air support and both MG nests and tanks stalling their push, Sullivan ends up sliced and diced, leaving only Miller and Roebuck to push on ahead. Assaulting the airfield, Miller and Roebuck manage to stop the AA guns and even turn them against the IGA when reinforcements try to take back the strip. Elsewhere, specifically Russia and back in 42, Stalingrad has been transformed into a hellhole by the Nazis. Men, women, and children have all been exterminated, yet by hiding himself amongst his dead comrades, Private Dmitry Petrenko avoids joining them. Petrenko wasn't the only one who employed this strategy, as when he starts to crawl out of the fountain, he bumps into Sergeant Reznov. He's been stalking General Heinrich Amsel, described as the architect of Stalingrad's misery. Wanting to avenge the massacre of the city, the duo chase after Amsel, leading to a cat-and-mouse game between themselves and the Wehrmacht. Though death follows them closely, it's by Petrenko's hand as he deal it to Amsel. Flash forward to 1945, the Red Army is pushed back against Germany and are basically on their doorstep. Leading the charge into Silo Heights is of course Petrenko and Reznov, but also the martial pacifist Private Chernov, who takes umbrage with the mindless slaughtering that the Red Army is inflicting upon the people of Germany. Their land, their people, their blood indeed. Meanwhile, Miller and Roebuck take more of Peleliu, capturing mortar pits and additional artillery to allow American armors safe passage. Back in Silo, Petrenko and Reznov fully capture the city by way of tank, giving the Red Army as close as a direct line to Berlin as possible through Germany's system of railroads. The tracks end at the borough of Pankow, where the Red Army continues its scorched earth campaign until it reaches Berlin. Fighting their way through the barraged city, Petrenko, Reznov, and Chernov wind up in the metro, which is flooded to prevent them from reaching the Reichstag. As our Russian crew attempts to avoid drowning, our American team has moved on to Okinawa, but instead of reuniting with Miller, we accompany Petty Officer Locke of the PBY Catalina Manta Ray.
Yeah, I see him. Landry, open up comms. Major Garden, vessels are now in visual range. Unmarked Japanese merchant fleet. Designation unknown.
They're probably resupplying the enemy on Okinawa.
Legitimate targets?
Affirmative, they're part of the enemy war machine. Permission to engage, over now.
Roger that. Laughlin, Locke, get to your station. Stop picking targets.
It and PBY Hammerhead have been given notice that the IGA are receiving resupplement from Japanese merchant ships, thus the two flying boats disrupt them. Before they can head home, however, a distress signal coming from the Navy requests extraction as they got caught by Imperial Japan's Air Force, or Navy Air Service. All I know is that a bunch of Zeros swarm the manta ray and blow up the Hammerhead, leaving the former alone for the rescue mission, which it does complete but barely due to the intervention of the United States Air Force. Finished with our interlude, we return to Miller and Roebuck, now with their third man, Private Polanski, blowing up defensive locations on Okinawa in an attempt to get to Shuri Castle. While running low on supplies, the three hold out long enough for a drop, allowing the trio to take the castle, though at the cost of either the death of Polanski or Roebuck. This ends the American half of the story, leaving the Russians to finally push onto the front steps of the Reichstag, but like with Miller, Petrenko and Reznov lose their third man to an ambushing flamethrower. Taking a memento off of Chernov, his diary that either states that Petrenko is a saint, a conflicted hero, or a monster, Reznov alongside Petrenko take the Reichstag, fighting to its roof to plant the hammer and sickle to signal Germany's defeat in the end of the Eastern Front. Disaster does almost strike again as a Wehrmacht soldier does manage to wound Petrenko, but Reznov butchers him and carries his comrade forward to drive the flag into the building, ending the Russian half of the campaign. World at War ends just like World War II did in history, with Harry Truman authorizing the usage of the atomic bomb on the cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, leading to the surrender of Japan. The last screen shown in the game is a statistic. 60 million lives were lost during World War II. If you haven't caught on, what I did differently was that I recapped in an incredibly flippant manner, like I did for the side stories of Resident Evil 7. There's no beating around the bush here, and I'm pretty sure everyone knows what I'm going to say. World at War is the game equivalent to a big dumb action movie. Think Saving Private Ryan as done by Michael Bay, but with less romance subplots and more triumph. However, the issue I take, and I'm going to use the word chagrin here, but it's to an extremely lesser extent of the word, and I'll elucidate you why. Chagrin with is how the game tries to present itself as serious. Not in the case of how these types of games usually go, but in the way that it seems like World at War is trying to showcase the horrors of war. There's nothing wrong with a game tackling tough subject matter, but it honestly feels that World at War is misplaced in that regard. It practically screams out war is bad during the cutscenes by using archive footage featuring actual war crimes, but then you play the game portion of World at War and it's complete tonal whiplash. World at War wants to have its cake and eat it too, where it wants a message, as boilerplate as it is, about the horrific nature of warfare and how heroes can be just as brutal as the villains, but then its fast gameplay runs over any potential theming like a steamroller. At times, World at War is hypocritical, as if war is so bad, why am I having fun? If the aim was to terrify the player via letting them snuff out lies quickly and easily and seeing how truly gruesome it is to do that, the game failed on that front by making the shooting too arcadey, too rewarding, and too, as I've said, fun. This isn't Spec Ops The Line, though my bringing it up is damnation by faint praise, as that game was purposely made unfun by, deconstruction. It's all your fault. Why would you ever make a game with the purpose of people not getting to play it? I'll never know. Why? It's such a dumb idea. Oh, fuck that game. I'm not pulling this line of thinking out of my ass either. Sean Murray describes the change in the Russian music as the Red Army being taunted by the German Angel of Death, a siren-like voice, captured in the song for Vendetta, that causes the Russians to sink down to the Nazis' levels, wholesale slaughtering men, women, and children in Berlin like how the Nazis did in Stalingrad. And the thing is, as I've said earlier in this section, the idea the story wants to peddle is so run-of-the-mill. I can get the exact same message with better clarity and nuance from not only other games, why hello Metal Gear Solid, but other pieces of media centered around war. Hell, Edwin Starr's song does a better job of portraying what World at War wants to do. In this same breath, however, I'm not angry at World at War for lacking a story, being bland or hypocritical. I said it was like an action movie, and it is. It's not whatever is considered high art nowadays, nor does it need to be. The plot is solid enough for a World War II shooter that you can kick back, relax, and settle into its gameplay. At worst, I have a slight irritation at World at War trying to come at me with its horrors of war message when I'm able to rip apart enemies with a very large gun and am rewarded for doing so with more gameplay, but I don't think the game cares either way as long as I'm having fun. It's not trying to critique me for choosing to engage in virtual violence, and that's the main difference. World at War knows it's a game, so while its story is rocky, it, or at least I think it knows that its main purpose is to have fun. To the extent of having fun, I flat out did, as the locales and the set pieces within the story are great to play through. It's a bit of swings and roundabouts here now, isn't it? You can definitely tell the game is aged as the texture work is quite basic and somewhat flat, but I do think the character models still somewhat hold up. Somewhat. Yeah, they do look caked in Vaseline and are a bit uncanny, but World at War doesn't go the full Darkness 1 with its characters. Still, the characters can be quite unsettling to look at, but I'd much rather look at them than the unimpressive textures. Mainly because there are some neat details crammed onto the models, both for named and unnamed characters. The levels are definitely on the better side, as the common criticism levied at the series can't be used here for the most part, as World at War isn't brown and gray, but green and blue with hints of gray. There is some vibrance in the levels, especially in the Pacific Theater where most of the levels are in the lush jungles of Japan. I do think there are far too many levels set in this locale, as I sometimes get Hard Landing and Relentless mixed up, but it's better than the later half of the European theater where every level is just a mashup of gray corridors. So many gray corridors. Too many gray corridors that I now know how a dog feels. Please give me color. I miss it. The best I can say about the last parts of Petrenko's campaign is that it's at least neat to take a tour of the Reichstag and blow up its eagle before tearing down its flag. The ambient effects are also top-notch. For as gray as Berlin is, the rain coating everything in Ashin is a nice detail, as is the growing fog of war that basically floods the city streets. And so is the lighting. At times the game can look quite beautiful, such as the opening to Little Resistance, and I think when the game is in motion, many of the issues I have don't rear their ugly heads. Sound design, it's Call of Duty. Outside of a few outliers, all the weapons look good and sound great. If they didn't, we wouldn't have this series now, would we? Animation-wise is where you might find some cracks, though I don't know if this is because of upping the resolution. Reloading with the FG42 will never not be fun to me because of how stilted the animation is. 1 second the empty mag is free-floating, the next I'm pulling one out of thin air. It's magic! That said, we have a great double barrel reload animation. My pet peeve in a lot of FPSs with double barrels is that if I fired one shell, how come I'm reloading both barrels? There's no shell wasting in this game. The in-between stage animatics are a highlight, sans what I think about what the story is trying to do. Voice acting is alright. I think Gary Oldman and Keith Sutherland don't botch the material, but it's not like they're giving inspired performances. I would say it's akin to Liam Neeson in Fallout 3. The music, on the other hand, is fantastic, playing heavily on the idea of themes. While I did talk about the music in general in the history section, I didn't mention a specific part of it, that being how Murray gives each side a distinct sound. For the Americans, they have a heavy brass section to better offset the Japanese traditional taiko drums, creating this war of music. The Russians, meanwhile, start off with traditional orchestra before giving way to distorted synth, betraying how brutal they are in their campaign of revenge. It's all good stuff, both structurally and thematically, but if I had one gripe with the OST, it's that I wouldn't go out of my way to listen to it. It doesn't pass that threshold for video game music. Call of Duty World at War is a World War II first-person shooter where the player must reach the end of the level via completing different objectives that act as barriers for progression. It feels weird knowing that this is the first game that I'm covering with controls that I'm pretty sure everyone knows, as since Call of Duty 4 Modern Warfare these controls have been the standard. But what the hey, let me be redundant. General motion in the game is handled with the WASD keys while the mouse deals with aiming and firing. Shift as always is the run key, while G is grenades and R is reload. There are other actions tied to different keys on the keyboard, such as crouch, prone, melee, but to be frank, you might have to rebind the keys to get to something more suitable for modern times. Toggle aim down sights is what the game has as default instead of hold, so do be aware of the slightly antiquated nature of certain controls. Levels in World at War are generally A to B affairs, though when the player tries to make that venture, something inevitably pops up to hinder progress, whether it be enemies that need to be killed or objectives to be completed. I'll speak on these parts later, as I want to cover weapons first before delving into how the game will halt the player, as there are a variety of ways the game does this. Each level starts the player off with a starting loadout tailor-made for what character the player is controlling at the moment. Private Miller always starts a level off with a variety of American weaponry, generally a primary weapon like the Thompson, Garand, or Browning, and a secondary in the form of the 1911 pistol. Petrenko, on the other hand, uses Mother Russia's weapons, primaries being the Mosin Nagant, the SVT, or the P.S.S.S, with the secondary being the Tokarev pistol. Both characters aren't limited to just their country's weapons, mind you, as Miller has access to the Imperial Japanese armory and Petrenko is able to use the might of the Nazi war machine. See, the only way to acquire ammo for a weapon is to either find an ammo depot, which I think only shows up in the final mission of the American campaign, or walk over a copy of a weapon that the player is holding. So if I have the PPSH and walk over a PPSH, my ammo is replenished. That's if only I can find a PPSH in a level, however. Starting weapon loadouts usually won't last the player the entire mission, mostly because the only way to find ammo for those weapons is to hope teammates carrying said weapon die or to find hidden caches. That means procuring weapons on site is one of the key aspects of the gameplay. Not only are weapons found strung throughout a level lying around waiting to be picked up, enemies drop their weapons when they are killed. The weapons are divided into different categories, those being bolt-action rifles, carbines, submachine guns, light machine guns, pistols, and specialty weapons. Not to take up too much time talking about the specifics of each class type, bolt-actions are one-hit kills but fire slowly, carbines are jacks of all trades, submachine guns and light machine guns are busted, pistols are effectively useless, and specialty weapons are a case-by-case basis. All but the specialty weapons can be dropped by enemies, while the specials are either given to the player or found within the level. The flamethrower might as well be the best weapon in the game, the Panzerschreck is a meme, and the shotgun is fun to use for dismemberment reasons, but is a poor weapon because reality. Seriously, whoever thought to neuter shotguns in these types of games has never seen how destructive one is at far range in real life. Weapons can sometimes have variants that are capable of doing different actions, such as the scoped bolt actions being highly accurate but require the player to hold shift to steady their aim and reload slower due to the scope, or the Garand grenade launcher. While each campaign has a selection of scoped bolt actions, the Garand grenade launcher is unique only to the American campaign and only one level within it. Relentless. Speaking of the volatile fruit, the player always begins a level with 4 on their person, and after the secondary ones get unlocked, 8 in total. Grenades, like in real life, can either be thrown immediately, which is a poor idea against the AI, or cooked for a period of time. Cooking is what makes grenades useful, as enemies can't sidestep a grenade that blows up right when it gets to them. However, cooking for too long is a recipe for death, as there's nothing stopping the player from holding onto their pineapple until it explodes in their hands. Miller and Petrenko both have access to their side standard grenade, but Miller unlocks smoke bombs that protect him from MG nests and enemies alike, while Petrenko gets the Molotov, an impact-based throwable that burns all it touches. Both throwable types are a bit harder to replace than standard ammo, but there are defined pickup locations for them within a level. Melee is always an option for both characters, and it is a one-hit kill on human and dog enemies, but there's a reason for why wars are fought with ranged weapons nowadays. One last thing to go over when it comes to the player's actions in the standard stage is that sometimes an additional abilities given to the player, such as placing satchel charges, which are a third type of grenade, calling in an airstrike, or manning a turret. Air support rains down fiery death to wherever the player aimed it, but it has a 60-second cooldown before it can be used again, though certain story objectives instantly recharge it for use. Turrets come in a few shapes and sizes, such as stationary versions of the LMGs to AA guns that shred everything in their path. Most of the times a player has to use a turret, it's part of an objective where the player must defend a location. Turrets that aren't anti-air weapons do have to be mindful of overheating, a function shared with the flamethrower, though mounted portable LMGs don't have to worry about this. Level layout is mostly corridor-esque, as though certain sections might be quite open, there is only one direction the player can go to if they want to advance in World at War. Looking around does offer benefits, such as finding weapons or the collectible death cards, but is not necessary. What is, however, is killing the various enemies that hinder the player's path or completing the different objectives that pop up along the way. This wouldn't be a war game without an enemy force trying to stop the player, and though they come in different model types, each act the same. They attempt to shoot you dead via hit scan guns, blow you up, or use melee attacks if in range. Hit scan, I'm pretty sure better YouTubers have covered the term, but for simplicity's sake, bullets in World at War don't exist. Instead, when a gun that has bullets, as the Panzerschreck does fire a legitimate projectile, is fired, it projects an invisible line of light that travels a set amount of distance before stopping. If the light touches an object, it counts as a hit. You have it, enemies have it, we all have it in the World at War. So basically, not sitting in cover is a bad idea. Cover is a bit of a stretch, as there are no cover mechanics, you just have to crouch or prone behind something solid to avoid being shot, but it's better than standing out in the open and being riddled, though enemies have access to grenades just like the player, so be prepared to be flushed out from cover, I don't know, every few minutes. Health in World at War is handled just like it was in Modern Warfare 1, which is to mean that the player regenerates their health after not taking damage for a set period of time. That doesn't mean, however, that being gung-ho is a surefire option, as the game tends to put a stop to any horseplay quite swiftly. Running is disabled when a player is hit by a bullet, so rushing forward recklessly is more liable to transform you into Swiss cheese. It can be done, as certain segments in both campaigns kind of advise that strategy, but it's still highly risky. Regenerative health also doesn't stop instant kills like grenades, which have their own warning symbol that flashes up when a player is near one, exploding barrels in vehicles, or melee attacks, whether they be regular strikes or QTEs. Only in the Pacific Theater does the player have to worry about bonsai charges, where an enemy will rush the player to initiate a QTE. Mashing the melee button will succeed at every time, while failure is death. The only times you should die to this is because of slow reflexes or being confused on what your button layout is. Dying causes the player to respawn at the last checkpoint they pass, checkpoints being given out after set pieces or advancing to the next part in a level. There are special enemy units, though only 2, dogs which go down in one hit, and tanks that require bazookas, airstrikes, or turrets to destroy. While dogs are rare, only showing up in 2 levels and are a melee only unit, tanks make up the bulk of objective targets and can turn your ass to glass quickly with their shells or run you over for instant death. This applies to all vehicles, by the way, even ally ones. Objectives are the meat and potatoes of level progression, though most of the time pushing through the enemy force is the only thing the player has to do to go to the next level segment. However, sometimes the player has to sabotage key weapon locations or blow up tanks. The player isn't alone on the battlefield, as a set number of ally-aligned NPCs will help complete objectives. They are no better than bullet sponges and are only good for distracting the enemy. Accidentally killing too many also causes the friendly fire penalty, forcing a restart. Important NPCs will never die, while every other bloody red shirt might as well be named that. They are at least kind enough to drop their weapons on death. There are 2 vehicle levels in the game, but since one is a turret segment and one of the best levels in the game in my opinion, I only have to talk about the tank. It controls exactly like one, and the player is as near to invincible as possible. While the controls are more tank-like as opposed to human-like, there isn't much difference between the 2 schemes outside of the grenade button being swapped out for a flamethrower. World at War does have multiple game modes such as TDM and Nazi zombies, but the purposes of this video was to focus on the single player campaign as it's what I have memories with. That said, multiplayer is still hella fun, whether grinding it out in team deathmatch or Nazi zombies. This is where I have the fun time of deciding which level I like more. Vendetta or Black Cats. I think most people would choose either or as their favorite level, so I'm not original in that regards, but who's to blame me? Vendetta is this game's equivalent of All Gillied Up, while Black Cats might be the best turret sequence in a game ever. Starting with Vendetta, its pacing is what makes the level. From the slow build-up in the fountain where you see the horrors of Stalingrad and the architect who constructed them, to the bombastic ending of plunging into the river, escaping the remaining Nazi soldiers after assassinating their commander, Vendetta has it all. There's a nice little sniper battle that can have multiple phases depending on what the player does, to an Overwatch segment where a couple of comrades need to be protected. All the while, Gary Oldman's Reznov provides metaphorical commentary, using hunting imagery to describe the chase after the commander. To me, I think it is the perfect Call of Duty level, cleverly mixing sneaking sessions in with straight action while never killing the flow. One moment, I'm able to freely blast away anything in front of me like Red Sun Superman. The next, I'm running out of a burning building because I'm allergic to smoke and fire. The whole level is one big game of cat and mouse, a sentiment that even Reznov shares. It helps that Vendetta has a great weapon selection, and I am a bit biased towards the Eastern Front weapons compared to the Pacific Theater ones. However, I'll get to those after I'm done spooging about Black Cats. More like, black magic is making a turret segment this fun might as well be steeped within the arcane. There is a lot that I like about Black Cats, and as such I'll start with the strongest point the level has. The music. World at War has a great score, one that I'd argue is easily the best out of all the Call of Duties, but out of all the songs in the listing, Black Cats is the pinnacle, and it's all because of how well it synchronizes with the eponymous stage. It starts off slow, having a synth backing to not only act as the engine sounds, but to showcase the tension in investigating the merchant ships, before giving way to a heavy concession of drum beats that match the machine gun barrage fired off by the PBY. The song then dies back down before ramping back up, matching the events of Black Cats. Possibly my favorite part of this entire track is how it uses a damn awooga to great effect, as by the end of the level, the PBY gets so shot to shit that alarms would be going off. That's the other greatest part about Black Cats. The tension. The level starts off normal, 2 PBYs trashing 3 IGN ships, and then the Zeros show up. Not only do they easily swarm the player, they take out the allied aircraft for the level and almost do the same during the ending set piece where the player runs out of ammo. What really cements just how dangerous they are is that the game does keep an active track of how many the player has shot down, but even if you do take out the maximum possible number, the Zeros are still endless. Moving away from them, I think my favorite little detail in the level is the act of moving from turret to turret. It's so bouncy and captures the weight of moving within a PBY so well. Or at least how I would imagine it would, as I've never been in one. If I were to say one bad thing about Black Cats, it would be the shooting, but everything else easily overshadows that weak aspect. Moving on to the weapons, it's good old-fashioned World War II fare, and as such, it's a great selection. I'm not a gun taku, despite my brief period playing Girls Frontline. Bridal Lee Enfield can get it. But I do have a soft spot for older weaponry. Specifically submachine guns, that being the PP P.S.S. Who cares if it was a kinda crummy knockoff of the Suomi? Do you hear the noise it makes? There are a lot of video game guns that I like and a few real-world guns that I like, but the P.S.S. is probably the only real-world based video game gun that I like. Not only does it have such a perfect sound for when it spits out lead, its recoil is so negligible that I can cut down a whole squad with it and still have enough ammo in the drum for 2 more. My runner-up in the gun department would be the Buzzsaw for many of the same reasons. That would be the MG42 for those not in the know, but it's called the Buzzsaw for how well it does in woodworking, if woodworking was about cutting through human sinew and marrow. Something that the other LMGs, the trench gun, and the sniper rifles in the game are capable of doing. Gore was advertised for the game, and man does it exist. Legs and arms can get completely blown off, which does add to the more serious tone that the game is attempting to go for. Another aspect that I outright enjoy is the distinct feel that both campaigns have. The Pacific Theater focuses way more on run and gun combat due to the lack of cover, while the Eastern Theater is standard stop and pop action since a lot of the levels are set in destroyed cities. This even ties to the enemies, as while German soldiers are more content to bunker down and fire from a safe position, Japanese ones tend to rush the player with no care in the world. Anyone who's played a modern Call of Duty single-player campaign knows exactly what I'm going to say here. Stop throwing grenades! I swear, every 2 to 5 minutes a bomb would land at my feet, forcing me to run away from my position into one of 2 directions. From where I just came, or into enemy fire. Actually, it feels more like one direction, as even if you backtrack, that's still into enemy fire due to hit scan. It didn't help that enemies love to chuck their explosive droppings at me right when I was trying to recover from near death. What's the trough of the grenade spam though is just how lethal they are. If the grenade prompt is on screen, even if it's heavily transparent, that means you are still too close to it. The kill range on these things are insane, and making matters worse is that sometimes enemies throw them at allied NPCs and you can accidentally bumble into one right when it goes off. I want to say that happened to me at least twice? Of course, grenades aren't the only explosive that can cause this issue, as enemies armed with Panzerschrecks are just as capable of splattering your body parts across the battlefield. Them and tanks can be a hassle when they decide to show up. To cap off this rant about my limbs being Joe Boned off my body, the checkpoints in any of the Panzerschreck sections are spaced out a bit too far for my liking. Let's just say that Reznov's incessant howls of "Use the Panzerschreck!" isn't the only memory of their land, their blood that has been etched into my brain for all of eternity. I don't have any real level-specific problems, though I don't care much for the later Pacific missions, particularly Relentless and Blowtorch and Corkscrew. Both overstay their welcome, as they are 2 of the 3 longest Pacific missions, not counting Black Cats, and there isn't anything interesting done in them. Relentless is just a worse-off hard landing, while Blowtorch and Corkscrew is a lesser version of Breaking Point. Both of these weaker missions lack set pieces to make them memorable, or if they do, they are done better in another level. The assault on Shuri Castle and Breaking Point takes the idea of storming a fortress from Blowtorch and blows it up to be the entire level. I don't want to say that Relentless and Blowtorch are redundant, but both honestly feel like padding to such a noticeable degree. Moving on to weapons, you wouldn't catch me dead using any of the pistols or carbines that aren't automatic. Both hit for piss poor damage, so much so that I'd much rather hurl my soon-to-be detached limbs at the enemy rather than finagle around with either weapon type. I can at least say that the pistols being weak does make sense, as someone doesn't go to war with a sidearm as their primary weapon, but how come the Garand, SVT, and the Gavir all feel like garbage? Using them just didn't feel worth it, as not only was the damage low, the recoil and sound produced by the Gavir and the SVT made me feel like I was shooting a cap gun. The Garand has nice recoil, as in it kicks like a mule as it should, and sound, but I would have to pump at least 3 rounds into anything to get a result. I would much rather spray and pray with an LMG or submachine gun or use a bolt action. The damage for these guns is definitely there in multiplayer, though my focus for this video was the single player campaign, as that's what I remember this game for. To this day, World at War and Modern Warfare 2 are the 2 COD games I go back to play their campaigns. While I do think that World at War does stumble in parts, it's still impressive today. Steam is the easiest way to play the game, though it is available on Xbone through backwards compatibility.